Thanks for joining us, Jenny. I'm so glad to have you. This is the functional nutritionist that I've worked with for a while now.
Thank you.
And your family's been through some of the brain training stuff too, so we've kind of gotten to know each other and worked through some things together. And, before we jump into what we're going to talk about today, which is the MTHFR gene, the COMT, and kind of how it affects brain health, why don't you give everybody just a little bit of background about yourself too?
Yeah, so I'm a traditional naturopath and a certified bio-individual consultant, nutrition consultant. And yeah, I've been studying nutrition my whole life, and genetic testing is just one of the favorites.
Perfect. I love it. And I know you do a range of services from arranging diets for people based on certain conditions, genetics, to just, the actual supplements that people need, to, really kind of taking the chaos out of this kind of, area, right, of you need everything, and really kind of getting it down to what individuals need.
Exactly.
Right? Today, again, we're going to talk mainly about MTHFR and COMT. I probably have, a third of every client that comes in. We tend to be, having them get tested now because it changes brain health so much. It really affects the way we can get results in neurofeedback. If we're trying to train the brain physically down and their neurotransmitters aren't working or not detoxing the brain or things, that, causes it to slow down, can cause other, issues too. So what we want to really kind of jump into just quickly is kind of how that works with brain health. And I kind of came up with a basic slide here that kind of talks about the conversion, the detox side, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about this and kind of, how it affects brain health. And just, I know it affects a million things, but we'll try and just bring it down to the few kind of big things.
Well, methylation is like the master of everything. It's what helps with methylation. And MTHFR is what converts folate to methylfolate. Right. And folate's super important for the brain. Without folate, our brains can pretty much go haywire. Right. Not only does it affect methylfolate, but we need neurotransmitters. It affects our neurotransmitters, so in our gut. And so we need other B6, we need B12, we need all of these nutrients, these cofactors, which attach to our methyl groups to make them, which affects our brain. Right. So without these, our brains just don't work well. Right. And it's, methylation is one of those drivers that if it's not functioning, our detox goes bad, our brain goes bad, our everything is just kind of wreaking havoc,
And when methylation goes bad, is that a purely genetic thing? Is that a lifestyle thing? How do those kind of come into play?
So you have those two SNPs. We have the C67T and the other A265 gene or whatever. Right. And that gene, if you are homozygous, double SNPs, that means you have one from one parent, another from another parent. That makes you homozygous. Right. That makes you 70% less effective in that enzymatic function. That means you might likely be deficient in those cofactors. Now, not always, because we just talked, about a couple people who have perfect numbers with that gene. Right. Maybe their gut's working properly, but not everyone has a properly working gut. Right. If you're not getting enough hydrochloric acid, you're not going to absorb half those nutrients, which is going to affect your methylation.
Exactly.
So if you're heterozygous, maybe one from mom and none from dad, you might have a 30% enzymatic function. Yeah. So your diet goes into that. So if you're not getting enough B6, for instance, you're not going to make the neurotransmitters, which is what you need for your brain.
Exactly.
So that's super important. The A26, that one is a little different. That one, it's not as strong as the C67, but it does have some effect. But most people can override it with good nutrition. Right. The problem is most people don't have good nutrition.
And don't have good nutrition and don't know that they have the gene in the first place. Right. When you say we were talking about earlier, that person we were talking about earlier was me, right? I didn't think I had that at all, but I went down, or I got a DNA test and showed I had my DNA is set up for very low enzyme activity, which means I'm probably not breaking down as much of the folate into methylfolate. But my lifestyle and my diet and everything is probably in the top few percent, right? And so with that, all my homocysteine levels are totally perfect. All the, my energy levels are good and everything. So there's a lot of things we can do to overcome those things if we know it. But some people are, I had a good friend call me just this last weekend saying how he just thought he was aging and, was, a little bit maybe overweight, and now he just had so much low energy, could barely walk down the stairs without holding onto the rails, and he's only 50 years old, right?
Exactly.
And he said he went and got tested, got on the right protocols for all this, and he said, I feel like I'm in my 30s again.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, because it definitely drives aging. Methylation will drive your aging so quickly. So, and that homocysteine is super important, right? Because it can cause heart attacks, and people don't realize that they could be a walking time bomb with high homocysteine levels, and it's so easy to fix.
Yes.
All you got to do is take B12, B6, and methylfolate.
Right.
Of course, there's a couple other things you can add to
that. Right. But most doctors are just throwing them on medications and stuff and not looking at the DNA. I mean, your DNA is what encodes, all the way you break down homocysteine, right? How you, actually, break down or methylate vitamin B and get it into the energies in the cells and that ATP in the cells. There's so many things that does that. And if you can take all the vitamins you want and even eat the foods you want, but if you have specific DNA, you can't break down that raw material into the energy sources that you need in your body.
Right, and so many people go, oh, you can get all your nutrients from your food.
Right.
That's not always the case. Right. Now, someone like me, I need those supplements because my gut's not functioning with pernicious anemia, and those nutrients can really make a difference in life or death.
Right. That's exactly.
Because B12, without it, your body will go down really quick.
Exactly.
And it's scary. So supplements are very easy things that you can do to fix homocysteine.
But you have to have the right supplements.
Exactly,
too,
right. So let's talk about like folic acid. I mean, everything, folic acid is in everything.
Right.
They fortify everything, and that's synthetic.
Right.
And people don't realize that they're eating all this folic acid.
Especially when they're pregnant.
And when they're pregnant, and it masks B12 deficiency, and that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
I had no idea. They'd given you these prenatals with folic acid.
Yeah.
It's not methylfolate.
Right.
And sure enough, you end up with a B12 deficiency, and you have no idea that it's been masked all these years, and you're really sick. So we really want to make sure we're getting the right form of methylfolate.
And most doctors talk about, most science talks about that folic acid is a natural thing. However, we know it's not natural. It is not found in any elemental form in the world, in nature, right? Folate is, but not folic acid. And it's definitely a man-made chemical.
Right.
And it can't be broken down if you have these certain genetics, stuff with it.
That's
and other
why
people
it's so
can
good
break
to
it
know.
in. Right? Yeah, exactly. So, perfect. And the other one we want to talk about is the COMT. COMT variants is another genetic variant. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that one, kind of just in the simplified format.
Right. Well, it's a master regulator of pretty much your catecholamines, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely going to affect your neurotransmitters. And
talk a little bit about what catecholamines are.
Yeah, it's like your epinephrine, and your dopamine and your serotonin levels. And so if you have a slow one, that means you're basically dumping. Actually, fast would be you're dumping all your dopamine. Slow is you're not getting rid of your dopamine levels, and your dopamine levels will spike. But if it's fast, you're getting rid of so much dopamine that you're constantly craving more dopamine, and it's very scary actually, because these two genes can be connected with mental illness, and you probably see a lot of that with your patients.
Absolutely.
And that's probably what got me into all of this stuff, is because I wanted to see what was going on with some of my family members, and it's a lot of these genes. So if you're not balancing it out, which we want to have balance, that can make a huge difference.
And there's nutritional things you can do. If you know that you have, CMT slow or CMT fast, there's certain things you can do to help mitigate that.
Yeah, like magnesium, B2 is very important. Exercise, but you got epigenetics as well, right? So what you're doing outside of your nutritional things, like exercise, food, diet, is going to affect how fast or how slow those genes are. Now, your genes don't define you, but they give you a good idea of what you want to do with them, like whether you want to tame them or speed them up, or nurture them a little bit more with some nutrients. There's very important things, because these are tied. MTHFR and COMT are tied to schizophrenia, and bipolar.
And anxiety, insomnia,
all
jaw
of these.
tightness and pain.
And then people go get on these medications,
Right.
and they don't realize these medications are depleting.
Right.
They're very neurotransmitters, they're B12, they're folate, all the stuff that they
Right.
need. And then that raises the risk for heart attack.
Right.
It's a horrible scenario. So taking care of your genetics is super important.
Absolutely.
And magnesium is very good.
And really knowing, because on some of these things, if you have fast, certain even supplements could cause more stimulation, right?
Right.
And because it could actually dump it faster, right?
Right.
And if you have slow, certain
Yes.
certain supplements could cause other problems too. So
Right.
really knowing before. I think that's the biggest problem with the nutritional industry as a whole, is that this supplement's good for anxiety. You can't say a supplement's good for anxiety. You have to know, do you have a deficiency in
Right.
that supplement causing anxiety? That might work for you, but someone else with even different genetics, that might actually cause anxiety, right?
Exactly,
Like
yeah.
things like ashwagandha can go a little bit either way on some of
Right.
those things.
Or caffeine.
Caffeine, 5-HTP, all these type of
Yes.
things can have effects different way based on your genetics.
Right.
Caffeine, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, just because you're slow doesn't mean you're going to be slow forever.
Right.
You can, speed it up and
Yeah.
you don't want to be slow or fast technically. You
Right.
really want to be,
Right in the middle.
right
Yeah.
in the middle. And that's
Right.
pretty much with every gene.
Right.
I would like everybody in the middle, but, epigenetics does play a part of that, and, diet and all this. And gut health. Gut health is connected to the
It's
brain.
huge.
So if our gut's not healthy, and sometimes we just, have issues, genetic issues that make it hard, it's going to affect how we're getting those neurotransmitters,
Exactly.
and protein and stuff like that.
I have so many people that come in with their brain map, and they have all this overactivity, in certain areas of the brain. They're always like, how did this happen? What caused this? And I always have to usually tell them, we can't really tell. We can see from a brain map the result of something.
Right.
But I can't tell if someone's been in stress for just a long time. Did they have trauma? Did they have a concussion? There's a lot of things that are kind of hard to know, unless we had a brain map every single year. But I think a lot of times it is the genetics, because if someone's more prone to stress, that's always staying up a lot higher, right?
Exactly.
If someone's more prone to depression, because of their genetics, then they're going to have more lower activity. And so I think over time, and that's where it's important for me to work with someone like you to correct these things, because we can take someone that has a lot of stress and we can train that down.
Right.
But if they leave their genetics and don't do anything about
Exactly.
it and supplements, then in 5-6 years, they're going to be back to where they were.
And that's usually where it comes to. It's like people don't like to change their diet habits. They don't. And it's really hard to lead a horse to the water and make them drink it,
Right.
So compliance with that issue, if they really care about feeling better, they want to look at this stuff, because what you do today is going to affect tomorrow.
That's right.
And I think about people with Alzheimer's. You can prevent a lot of this stuff by changing how you live now. Will affect how and what you're going to come up with later, because usually what happens is people, they come down with these diseases later on.
Right.
And they're like, where'd this come from? Well, this was a lifestyle habits that you've been doing for many, many years that have accumulated, and you didn't do anything about it. So this is your opportunity to
And they may have been even doing some of the good lifestyle things, but based on their genetics, it's not the things they needed to do.
Yeah,
right?
That's why one diet doesn't fit all.
Right.
I'm like, people go, oh, have you done this diet, this diet? I'm like, well, the ketogenic diet doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
Because if you're not producing enough carnitine, or you have some FTO gene, you're not going to do well in that. So people are big on like certain foods for certain people, but it's not that way.
That's right. Perfect. So some of your services that you do, just talk a little bit about that, is you can run some of these tests. Run some of these tests and give them, you can go on Amazon and run a test. But we have so many people do that, and then they're like, what does this mean? What do I do with it, right?
So I do use a couple companies. Fagron is one, which does telomere. They do psych testing. They do gut testing. Also, Nutrigenomics does panel testing. But if you wanted to do just one test, we also offer, that through Uvexia. And I also offer bio-individual nutrition consulting, which is basically a lot of people can't eat FODMAPs. Actually, genetics are tied to some of this stuff. MTHFR, surprisingly, makes you more prone to FODMAP problems, more prone to salicylate problems, and oxalate problems, which is really interesting, and people don't realize that. Bio-individual nutrition. Of course, nutritional, supplements and recommendations for that too.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That's right. I think it's something that the vast majority of our clients could use for sure.
Yes.
And it's such a need to combine. If they don't do those things, they're just going to be back in here every few years, with the brain activity coming back. So really looking at, what caused it in the first place. We have to correct it, but then we want to prevent it from coming back.
Right. It's a tool, just like your brain place is a tool, and it's helped my son so much. Thank you.
Awesome.
Because he's not only incorporating nutrition,
Right.
but he's also incorporating this, and it's helping him
Right.
so
Well,
much.
I think that, if say someone had all this activity in the brain, they can go get on the right supplements and do the right thing, get the right testing and stuff, but they still have the 20, 30 years of that.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of cool to retrain that down and gives them a fresh start. Right. And then you get on the right stuff and you maintain that.
Yes.
Right. Versus bringing it back up.
Yeah. And then, a lot of this stuff, like MTHFR, people are more prone to addictive personalities.
Yes. Exactly.
And then they start getting on, the marijuana and all these other things, which throws everything off and then increases more anxiety. So they're on a rabbit trail of all these other problems.
Yeah.
And then you want to get them off that stuff.
Yeah. And even the COMT. I mean, people have COMT fast. They're chasing kind of the next high. Their brain's constantly going. They're converting adrenaline like crazy. So, they're using usually alcohol, cannabis to slow that down to, kind of be able to just chill out and stuff. And it's self-medicating. And so when you change some of those things and get them on the right nutrition, it's amazing that I've seen so many times where they forget to drink. They forget to do the cannabis because they're not needing it.
Exactly.
When you're already relaxed, you don't need a drink. You don't need that.
Well, the lie is that, it helps anxiety, but they don't realize that it's actually increasing your anxiety.
Right.
It's a temporary fix, like alcohol. It'll increase your dopamine for a very short amount of time, and then it's going to drop and deplete.
Yeah.
So it's like a constant rabbit trail of like trying to fix things where you don't, you're just doing more harm than good.
Right. And along those addictions, we always think of, cannabis, we think of alcohol, we think of drugs and those things. But, what we see so much of is these 10, 11, 12-year-old boys with video games too. Right. And that's still an addiction. When their, dopamine is dumping so quick, they're looking for the next thing. And the only thing that can provide that is a super fast-paced, high-stimulating video game. But then they dump it all, and then they stop the game, and they have no dopamine left. And you see their reactions are horrible, and their attention goes bad, and all these things. So, instead of parents necessarily just saying, you get off the video games now and having that fight every single day, sometimes getting them on the right nutrition that can help do that makes that shift easier.
And a good exercise program, I always say, because that increases your dopamine.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably why I became a fitness trainer, because I get to exercise all the time and it increases my dopamine.
It's amazing how exercise changes everything.
It's a definite high, naturally.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming. Hopefully that helps to kind of explain some of these things to everybody. I think it's a great fit with brain health too. So
definitely. Thank you for having me.
You bet.